Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales, whether it's from confidence, comfort, and just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help professionals like you improve at sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking differently about what you already know. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and here we are with Mike Simmons, the founder of Catalyst Sale. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Jody.
Mike, you've thrown me for a bit of a loop. I got so used to our original opening, and now we've got a new one, which is quite delightful, but the old one was kind of seared into my brain.
Well, and this is what is this? This is the third version of an opening that we've had.
It is the third version, and I like that you change it because when I talk to people about podcasting, I always say, look, don't let the intro hold you up. Don't let the cover art hold you up. And you're also on version 3 maybe of cover art? But you're doing the things I tell people to do. Don't get hung up on the little things because it doesn't matter. Just do what you do now and then change it later when you get better, when you understand it. And so you've done that, and I'm happy you have.
Well, and like Lee said at the mastermind, as we go in the way, way, way back machine, what was the comment he made? Don't fall in love with the idea.
That's right. That's right. Don't fall in love with the idea. Well, speaking of ideas, we often talk on this show about good ideas, good practices, more practices. We do talk ideas too, but we talk about good practices. Mike often gives you the outline of this is what you should be doing. This is a good practice. But what if we turned that the other way and I asked Mike about bad practices? So Mike, that's what I want to do. I don't know if you're comfortable. You're a positive guy. I don't know if you're comfortable talking bad practice. Would you do that this episode?
Well, absolutely. And actually, I've got a story to share that just happened to me. Actually got me pretty fired up.
Oh boy.
Last week. It's good to get fired up from time to time, but this one really just lit me up.
Oh, well, now I've got to hear it. Even if that was not going to be the topic of the show, if you had told me that, we would have changed the topic of the show just to hear the story.
So I got one of those requests, and it was an email that came through the hello@catalystsale.com email address. And it was one of those where someone was trying to sell me something. It was pretty clear that they were trying to sell me something. In this instance, what they were trying to sell me was one of those pay-for-play type items where you've seen them. They happen, a number of different research articles that are out there where the research article is sponsored by the company that they're highlighting. And same kind of thing. I won't name the name of the company because I don't think they deserve that credit. And I believe that they've been identified as a company who has gone through some of these practices before. And I was absolutely shocked at what happened. And it sounds like I'm kind of embellishing or, amplifying how shocked I was, but it was just extremely frustrating, especially when right now things are as busy as they are. Busy from the standpoint of there's always something that we're all either thinking about or working on. And we're recording this in, it's mid-April of 2020. So many of us are, in the shelter in place mode right now, and we're all working on different things. We've all got a lot of stuff on our mind. Well, in this instance, I got a request. I responded back to the person who had sent in the request, said I was happy to schedule some time, and I gave that person my Calendly link to book time. They booked time for a period that was, I think, 2 or 3 days later. And when I showed up for the call on my Zoom, I actually got a phone call from somebody else with the same area code number. That area code number matched the person who I was originally planned to meet with. And I pick up the phone, and it's somebody where it was clearly an outsourced sales call. The person speaking on the other end English was not their primary language. We've seen these instances where people outsource BDR and SDR, so business development rep, SDR type rep roles offshore, whether it's India or the Philippines or Costa Rica or any number of locations. Anyhow, this person gets on the call and says, person X, let's just call him Tom. Tom is not going to be able to meet with you. So I'd like to take the call going forward. So I said, okay, that's fine. Tom's not going to make the call. So the first question is, did you have any questions related to the information we shared with you? I said, well, hold on. Do I have any questions relative to the information I shared? Why is Tom not able to make the call? Well, Tom's not able to make the call due to the coronavirus and other priorities that have taken his attention. So a meeting that was scheduled just 3 days later, now all of a sudden he's got some issue that's going on related to COVID-19, which if you're listening to this in the States, we started locking things down right around mid-March. So for weeks, we've been in this operating environment. And now all of a sudden, a call that was scheduled 3 days ago, the person's no longer able to attend. And it became very clear after that exchange that the intention was purely around selling me on the idea of why I should work with them to have a piece written about our organization. There was really no discovery that was done. And the frustrating part to me is I could have been a buyer. In fact, I'm happy to invest in those pay to play type scenarios because I think I look at them as an advertising investment and a distribution investment. But by going through this over specialization process or practice, they missed out on an opportunity to properly qualify me and created an opportunity where I was extremely frustrated with their approach. So I thought I'd share that just as a bad practice or poor practice type example. And what can go wrong when you start outsourcing components of your sales process to folks that are not part of your organization, and you don't think about the person on the other end who's actually making a buy or purchase decision.
When I hear stories like that, and I've had things like that happen, and I think, gosh, that can't work. But I also think, well, it must sometimes, or they wouldn't keep doing it. And we'll get more into the idea of practices, but I just want your thought on that. When an organization does something like that, is it working enough times to make them keep doing it?
Well, I'm happy you said that was a story because I kind of felt like I was just riffing off of an experience and didn't really put it into a good story arc. So thanks, Jody. Yeah, but it has to work, and they've got to be playing some kind of numbers game where financially it just works out for them. And what I think what they're doing is they're saying, here's what it cost me to acquire a customer. Let's say that for each of these deals that I put together, let's say it's $5,000 for this thing. If it costs me $2,500 to acquire a customer and I've got another $500 or even $2,000 in additional expense in building something out for the customer, then I've got $500 in profit that I might get out of this. $2,500 plus the $2,000 gets us to $4,500, and then the $5,000 total. So $500 remaining profit that helps me justify the process from my end on the business side. But what it doesn't take into account is the amount of waste that happens on the other side. How much time did this cost the customer on the other end? How frustrating was the experience? What's the blowback going to be as the story gets shared outside in the marketplace? So I do believe that these things work. They must. There's somebody who's got a spreadsheet that shows that they work, but I would challenge the person who did this and say, there's a better way. There's a better way to identify your customer. There's a better way to engage with your customer. There's a better way to have a conversation and properly go through the discovery process that will lead better results. So your cost of customer acquisition as a percentage of the value of the total contract value or value of the product that you're delivering would actually be less than it might be in this volume play.
Well, yeah, that's maybe someday we have an episode about the idea of pay to play and when it makes sense. And that's a whole separate topic. I hear this and think, oh my goodness, it's got to be at such a volume that they don't care about the 99 out of 100 that get upset like you did. They just care about the one that says, oh, tell me more. And I just don't, in the idea of bad practices, that sure seems like one. And then I think, okay, so if it's working enough to make them keep doing it, if we turn that into our organizations, how do we know if we have a bad practice, but we just keep doing it because it works enough that we haven't noticed it's a bad practice?
I really think it starts with having a conversation with your customer, having an actual discussion with the people who make a decision to buy. and those people who make a decision not to buy, to get an understanding of what their feeling was, or how they would describe the experience that they had with your organization. I'll give you another example. And we all see this, and we've talked about this before. I think we talked about it on an episode of the Jody Mayberry show when we were talking about, is LinkedIn broken? And are there some challenges associated with LinkedIn? I think there are in general. There are a lot of people in LinkedIn who just use LinkedIn as a platform to sell to each other or promote what they're selling across a group of other people who are promoting. And you can just get lost in the noise. Yet there are a number of people who go to LinkedIn to find a potential solution for a problem. They build these networks and they lean on these networks to help them address a problem or challenge that they're facing. They lean on these networks for education. They lean on people's personal experience. Yet every day I will get 3 to 4 connection requests where the connection request is kind of the same structure. I noticed that we have a number of connections in common. I noticed that we have a number of connections in common. I would be humbled to join your LinkedIn network and share my content and see your content and see how we can mutually benefit and all these other things. And it's the same message that goes out to probably 100 different people that they sent that message out to earlier in the day or earlier in the week or over the course of the past month, however it is. But they're copying and pasting these messages. I'm now at a point where I'm more likely to accept a LinkedIn request to connect that doesn't have anything in the message than one of those that has the boilerplate, I'm humbled to be part of your network connection. And so think about that, where we move from personalized to pseudo-personalized en masse to not saying anything. And actually the one that works best for me still is personalized. Second best is I didn't put any comment in there so that there's no context. And the worst one is the one where it looks like I'm just part of your distribution network strategy.
That says something for sure. When saying nothing is the better option. But you're right. You see the same ones over and over on LinkedIn. And I don't know if people are copying, if somebody's teaching to do it a certain way. But yeah, the buzzword at the moment on LinkedIn is collaborate. Oh, I noticed we have some people in common. Let's connect and collaborate, or see if we can collaborate. I've seen a lot of those lately.
Jody, do you think the person who owns the LinkedIn profile is actually sending that, or do you think they just outsource that to somebody else?
I think it's both. There are some that are outsourced because you can do that. There are people that's what they do for a certain amount of dollars every week, every month. They will say, I will get you X amount of targeted connections. And so that's part of it. And then the other is people getting connections like that and saying, oh, that must be what works. And then they copy it.
So to get back to your question that you asked before, like kind of we can do, and I know it's been a bit that we've been talking, and I'm probably remembering the question, but one of the things that comes to mind in this is just test yourself and say, is this thing that I'm doing better for me, better for the customer, or will we mutually benefit in one way, shape, or form? And if the amount of value that's derived is significantly skewed one way or the other, maybe you should rethink your approach and rethink how you're executing here, and if this is really the right way to go about doing the thing that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's good. And I think you will find a lot of practices aren't as good as you think they are, or can at least be improved. I'm not going to say they're all bad, but a lot of them can be improved. And you just won't know it if you're not talking to customers, if you're not reaching out to someone like Mike and saying, hey, Mike, this is what I do. Can you give me some feedback? How is this? And I think it's important just have the conversations, or even better, I think it's Tony Robbins always says, if you want to be successful, find someone who's accomplished what you want and copy them. So you find someone that's good at sales practices like Mike Simmons and you copy them.
And you go out there and you test and you leverage those feedback loops. You listen. So you test ideas, you ask for feedback, and then you listen and take in that feedback, and then you start to adjust. And I know we've talked about this in multiple episodes before about leveraging things like your OODA loop. Observe, and Dave Burke was on the podcast as a guest a number of episodes back where he talked about this. And it's something that came that John Boyd had created and developed. It's observe, orient, decide, and act, and constantly go through this looping process as you're implementing new ideas and concepts inside your organization to figure out which ones are yielding the results that you're looking for, rather than just guessing and taking a spray and pray type approach, which is how I would describe what happened in that scenario where a meeting was set up. I was actually baited and switched and I know that sounds extreme, but I had expected I was going to be meeting with someone, expected we were going to be meeting in a different format, and then received a phone call from somebody else. And then the conversation was a bit different than what I had anticipated. And to me, that felt like a bait and switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is the point earlier in the episode when you talked about the different person and it felt outsourced. And that's the thing when it feels, I'm sure to you, it didn't feel like, oh, this was a legitimate thing, because among other things, if it was, I'm sure you could have just rescheduled. So when you have a potential customer in the first conversation they're having with your organization and they feel like they've been baited and switched, is that how you would say past tense of bait and switch? Baited and switched?
Sounds good to me. But then again, I'm just a country bumpkin out here in the state of Arizona watching tumbleweeds roll back past my window.
Yeah, well, that's just not a great first conversation to have with a potential lead, especially when it was, as Mike said, that could have been something he was interested in if handled the right way, but you don't get anywhere with a bait and switch. So, Mike, let me ask you this. If we listen to this conversation and think, I want to make sure I don't have any bad practices that might be hurting me. And you said talk to customers, test things, but first step, if this is the first we've thought of that, where do we begin?
I think start where your customer first or your prospect first either engages or is engaged in your process. Start right at the beginning. So how do you identify prospects? What's that process look like? Is that handled by an account executive, or is that handled by an SDR or BDR group? Is that handled by your marketing team? It could be handled by a number of different folks, but start with what that first engagement looks like. Is the engagement one where they raise their hand based on learning something? Or is it one where you're asking them to do something based on something you're communicating out? Are you proactively engaging with them to try to create some kind of response, or are they reaching out to you based on a given need? And then as you start to understand that aspect, say, what should that next experience look like? What happens next? If you've got an environment where you've become overly specialized inside your sales organization, you've got BDRs, SDRs, account executives, account managers, customer success managers, all of these things. And it's really hard to kind of figure out where people fit inside the organization, or it might be confusing to those outside of the organization if you try to explain it to them. Then you may want to revisit that and say, do we require this level of specialization or this level of complexity inside our organization, making this good for our customers, or is it a bad customer experience? And maybe one of these days we'll talk about that. What does customer experience look like from the outside looking inside your organization? To get back to your question, Jody, I think the first piece is start where the first engagement happens. Understand what was the catalyst for that engagement. Once you've understood that, understand what the next step in the process is going to look like. Anticipate how folks respond. Test that in the interactions that you have with your customers, and then continue to adopt and iterate. For me, you should always have the mindset of this should be good and this should be comfortable for the customer. They're the one who's making the purchase decision. They're the one who has the problem, whether it's known or unknown, that needs to be solved. Your job is to help guide them through the process, which we've talked about kind of ad nauseum in conversations we've had with Donald Miller and JJ Peterson and leveraging story. Be a guide for your customers. Don't be the one who's, I'm trying to think what they would be called, but the caller that's outside trying to bring people into the shop, just trying to draw attention inside. Give first rather than constantly trying to get.
Yeah, that's great advice. When you talk about the person outside calling for people to come in the carnival would be the barker. if you were
There you go,
barking for the yak lady.
Barking for the yak lady. Yeah. And then what's the scene in Christmas Vacation where the yak lady choked on something and just hasn't been the same? I'll have to go back to that. But yeah, don't be the barker. I know it works in some instances. Like, I remember being at Jets games as a kid and having the guys walk up and down the aisles yelling, beer here, and just they're drawing attention to this thing that they're selling. Is that the kind of product that you're selling in the marketplace, where you want to be the shouting and shouting and shouting to see who responds? Or do you want to be much more targeted, much more design oriented, focused first on where the customer is and helping them navigate through this thing that they're working on? I prefer to be in the second category because I don't want to contribute to the noise that's out in the marketplace. I want to help people get toward that solution. And there's a way that you can design for that.
All right. That was a good look at bad practices. Mike usually teaches us about good practices, but sometimes that's how you get better, is you find something bad, whether it's your own, whether you saw someone else do it like Mike, whether you experience it, whether someone tells you, and then you figure out, okay, am I doing that? And two, what did I learn there that I need to not do? Mike, do you have any final words for us on bad practices?
Be realistic. Take time and reflect. Observe those things that you're going through and try to remove your bias when you're evaluating the approach that you're using. And go back to that question. Is this more beneficial to the customer? Is it more beneficial to me, the organization? Or is there balance between who benefits? And as you start to get further along that continuum, either one side or the other, there may be a need to adjust and bring it a little bit closer to the center.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.